"Can I sit with you?"
the hungry girl asked. What the billionaire did next left everyone speechless. The gentle clinking of silverware and the soft hum of a piano filled the Aria, the city's most exclusive restaurant. Golden chandeliers shimmered above tables draped in pristine white linen, while waiters glided between guests, serving meals that most people could only dream of affording. At the far corner, Ethan Cole, a young billionaire known more for his empire than his smile, sat alone. Before him rested untouched plates, roasted duck, truffle pasta, a glass of aged red wine. He had everything money could buy, except peace. Outside the frosted glass doors, a small girl named Aria, no older than 8, watched silently, barefoot, shivering, her tiny hands pressed against the cold glass as she gazed at the warmth inside, and the food she could only imagine tasting. When she reached for a half-eaten sandwich someone had tossed away, a waiter snapped, "Hey, get away from here. You don't belong near this place." Aria froze, tears welling up, but hunger made her brave. Taking a deep breath, she slipped through the half-open doors and stepped onto the polished marble floor. Gasps spread across the room. Heads turned. Her small, trembling voice broke the silence. "Can I sit with you?" The waiter rushed toward her, his tone sharp. "Sir, should I remove her?" But Ethan lifted his hand, stopping him mid-step. He looked into the girl's eyes, and for a moment, the elegant restaurant disappeared. He saw himself again, a hungry boy, forgotten, invisible. "No," he said quietly. "Bring another plate, the best one you have." The room went still. Even the piano faltered. Aria's lips parted.
"Really?"
she whispered. Ethan nodded softly. "Sit down, sweetheart. Tonight, you're my guest." When the food arrived, she stared at it as if it might vanish. Her first bite of warm bread brought tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you, sir," she murmured. "No one ever lets me stay." Ethan looked around the room, his voice calm but cutting through the hush. "You're all watching," he said. "Maybe ask yourselves why a child has to beg for dinner in the first place." No one spoke. Even the waiter turned away, blinking fast. Between bites, Aria shared her story. Her mother gone, her father never returned, and how she'd been surviving alone on the streets for months. Ethan reached out, resting his hand gently over hers. "You're not trouble," he said. "You deserve care, not pity." Then, standing up before everyone, he lifted her into his arms. "She doesn't need leftovers," he said firmly. "She needs a life." As he carried her out, diners slowly rose from their seats. Some left money on the table. Others simply wept. That night, in the quiet of his car, Aria lay under a blanket, finally warm. "Are you rich?" she whispered sleepily. Ethan smiled faintly. "I thought I was," he said, "but tonight, I found something worth more than money." She smiled softly, eyes closing. "You're the kindest person I've ever met," she whispered. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And you," he murmured, "are the bravest little girl I've ever known." The morning light crept through the car windows, brushing softly against Aria's sleeping face. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat quietly behind the wheel, watching the little girl breathe, her tiny hand still clutching the blanket he had wrapped around her. It was the first time in years he'd stayed awake for something that wasn't work. When Aria finally stirred, she blinked at him sleepily. "Good morning," he said softly. She rubbed her eyes. "Are we going back?" Ethan smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart, not back. Somewhere new." Minutes later, his black sedan pulled into a quiet street lined with trees. At the end stood a modest brick house. Not one of his mansions, but a place that once belonged to his late mother. It was small, warm, real. Ethan opened the door for her. "You must be hungry." Inside, the smell of toast and coffee filled the air. Aria hesitated, standing in the doorway as if afraid she might break something just by being there. "It's okay," Ethan said gently. "This is your home too, for as long as you need." Tears welled in her eyes. "No one's ever said that to me before," she whispered. He handed her a plate of pancakes topped with berries and syrup. She looked at it like it was a dream. "Do I really get to eat this?" Ethan laughed softly. "You get to eat this every day." After breakfast, she explored the house, the bookshelves, the small garden outside, the photo of a smiling woman on the wall. "Who's she?" Aria asked. "My mom," Ethan said quietly. "She used to say that the world changes when you show kindness to someone who can't repay you." Aria smiled. "She sounds nice." "She was," Ethan replied, voice softening. "You remind me of her." Later that day, Ethan made a few phone calls to a school, a doctor, and an old friend who ran a foundation for children in need. By evening, he had arranged everything. A safe place for Aria to stay, clothes, medical care, and a chance to go to school again. But when he came back to the living room, she was sitting on the couch hugging a pillow, looking worried. "Are you going to leave me too?" she asked in a tiny voice. Ethan froze. "What do you mean?" She looked down. "Everyone does. My dad said he'd come back, but he never did." He knelt beside her, placing a hand over her trembling fingers. "Aria," he said gently, "I can't promise the world, but I promise this. You'll never go hungry again. You'll never be alone." Her lips quivered, then curved into the smallest smile. She threw her arms around his neck, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt something real. Not power, not wealth, but purpose. Days turned into weeks. The girl who once watched restaurants from the street now ran through his garden, her laughter echoing through the halls. Ethan started spending less time in his office and more time at home, reading bedtime stories, cooking breakfast, walking her to school. One afternoon, a reporter recognized him outside a bakery. "Mr. Cole, people say you've changed. What happened?" Ethan smiled at Aria, who was holding his hand tightly. "Let's just say," he replied, "someone reminded me what it means to be human." The article that followed went viral. The billionaire who shared his table with a hungry child. Donations poured into his foundation, but Ethan didn't care about the money anymore. He only cared about one thing: the little girl who taught him that the greatest riches in life aren't measured in dollars, but in hearts healed. That evening, as they watched the sunset from the porch, Aria leaned against him and whispered, "Do you think my mom can see me?" Ethan smiled, his eyes glistening. "I think she's proud of you. And I think she's smiling right now." Aria nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "And I'm proud of you too." For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like a man who had saved someone. He felt like a man who had been saved. 15 years passed. The little barefoot girl who once asked, "Can I eat with you?" had grown into a confident young woman, Aria Cole. Yes, Cole, because Ethan had adopted her when she was 10. Now 23, she stood in front of a mirror, wearing a crisp white coat with her name stitched over the pocket, Dr. Aria Cole. Her reflection smiled back, not the scared child from the streets, but a woman filled with purpose. That morning was special. It was the grand opening of the Aria Foundation Hospital, a place dedicated to caring for children without homes, the same kind of children she once was. Ethan, now older, his hair silvering at the edges, sat quietly in the front row of the ceremony. He tried to hide his pride, but his eyes betrayed him. When Aria stepped up to the podium, the audience fell silent. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew steady. "When I was 7, I walked into a restaurant barefoot and hungry. I didn't know it then, but that moment changed 2 lives. Mine and the man who didn't turn me away." She looked at Ethan and smiled softly. "That man taught me that love isn't about what you have, but what you give. And today, I dedicate this hospital to him. My father. My hero." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. The applause was thunderous, but he barely heard it. All he could see was the little girl from so long ago, now standing tall, healing others. After the ceremony, Aria found him outside, sitting under a tree in the hospital garden. The same calm smile he always wore was still there, though time had etched lines across his face. "You didn't tell me you'd name it after yourself," he teased gently. She laughed. "It's not named after me. It's named after who I used to be, the girl you believed in." He reached for her hand, squeezing it softly. "You've done more than I ever could, Aria." She shook her head, eyes glistening.
You gave me a life.
I'm just passing it on. Ethan leaned back, watching children play nearby, kids laughing, eating, living freely. I used to think wealth meant power, he said quietly. Now I know it means legacy. And you are mine. She smiled through her tears. Then you should know, Dad. Your legacy is saving lives. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in gold and rose. The sound of laughter floated through the courtyard, a melody of second chances. Ethan felt peace wash over him. Promise me, he whispered. You'll keep doing this, even when I'm gone. Aria squeezed his hand tighter. You're not going anywhere. You'll always be here. She pressed her palm to her heart. Right here. Years later, when Ethan's time finally came, thousands of children and families filled the hospital courtyard, holding candles in his memory. Above the entrance hung a plaque. In honor of Ethan Cole, the man who shared his table and changed the world one heart at a time. Aria stood beneath it, tears glimmering but her voice steady as she whispered into the evening air. Thank you for believing in me. I'll keep the promise. She turned to the hospital doors, where a new child waited, small, frightened, barefoot, and smiled warmly. Hey there, she said softly. Are you hungry? The little boy nodded. Then come on, Aria said, reaching out her hand just like Ethan once did. Let's get you something to eat. And as the doors closed behind them, the world outside grew a little brighter. Because kindness, once given, never really ends.